welcome everyone to Rock M Radio. It's the beginning of a brand new episode of Dive Cuts. We've been here for 6 seasons now. This is the 37th episode of Dive Cuts. We're here to talk about your Missouri basketball Tigers. I'm your host, Sam Snelling, with you as always. And back again 2 times in a row, Matthew J. Harris. Matt, how are you?
I'm well. We've been trying to go to the every other week recording schedule, and then the first time out that happens, the fates just dump a whole lot of stuff.
Yeah,
that we take off. So they're like, we'll get to summer and it'll be a little lighter. Nope.
Last week was an eventful news week for Mizzou basketball. I kind of recapped everything for everybody that reads the site. Everybody that follows things on Twitter, reads the site, you probably know. Chronologically, what happened was Connor Vanover committed to Missouri, thus completing the Missouri roster, or so we thought. And then on Tuesday, Kaleb Brown announced he was coming back to Missouri, taking his name out of the transfer portal, thus completing the Missouri basketball roster, or so we thought. And then Wednesday, Isiaih Mosley tweeted that he was going to forego any remaining college eligibility and pursue professional options. Something that we always kind of knew was on the table, but there it was. And so there was all this news that just sort of flooded, and we were sitting all there quietly at the end of the week. And then one of Missouri's top targets in the 2024 recruiting class, John Bull, decided he was going to go ahead and commit quicker than the original plan, and he's going to the Florida Gators. So again,
all the big names, though, all of them.
Yeah, I think right now, like the Gators have like 6 dudes on the roster who are post players, and yeah, so Todd down there is just going to go for all the size. But we're going to go chronologically here because I feel like that makes the most sense. We have already kind of spent some time talking about Connor Vanover, the potential impact that he could have, our excitement levels for him. If we all just believe in Evan Mia's BPR, then we're all very excited about Connor Vanover because he was, the 11th rated transfer in BPR?
Yeah, Connor Vanover checked in at number 11. Just for reference, that was ahead slightly of Micah Hamilton of Florida, considered probably one of the best undergraduate transfers to come out this year. He was a freshman at Marshall and transferred to Florida. Connor Vanover slightly ahead of him. And then probably a name that a lot of people are familiar with, Jamarian Sharp, about 10 or 12 spots ahead of Jamarian Sharp. So if you're looking for like a relative sort of, gauge there, he was probably, somewhere in that range. And I think probably like one of the, depending on how you want to use different metrics, probably between like the 10th and 15th best big man in the portal, depending on which metric you want to use. Do you want to use a recruiting service? Do you want to use Bart Torvik? Do you want to use Evan Maya? What do you want to do? But 10th and 15th, if you sort all that, is about where he is. So pick your favorite one, and that makes you feel the best about Connor Vanover committing to Missouri.
I'm going to stick with Evan Mia because that makes me feel the best. We just got the 11th best guy in the portal. M-I-Z.
Oh yeah.
But we did have a discussion earlier today, and I think it's worth bringing up. Basically, like our faith in BPR. I really love the approach, the attempt, and I think this is, and I do think that of all the analytics guys out there, I think Evan's attempt to quantify individual impact is the closest thing that we have to like an actual like analytics tool raw number that we can point to, we can use as that sort of quantifier. And I don't think anybody else is quite doing it that way. And I appreciate him trying, but it's a really, really tough metric to
Yeah.
to quantify just through analytics.
Yeah, the Bayesian performance rating is different, just in terms of trying to account for defense on that end of the floor. A lot of what we see is built through offensive impact because it's the most discrete sort of thing we have. We have the most data points about it. And just fundamentally, it's easier to measure offensive action than it is defensive action. Every time I write about defensive metrics, I always say there's what the grade is, but it's really kind of squishy. And I really think with defense, you have to go to the film, and you really have to have that context there to sort of understand it because, Connor Vanover, for example, is going to grade out pretty well on the defensive end of the floor. Whereas Grant Nelson, another really, really coveted big in the transfer portal from the same conference, played at North Dakota State, likely headed to Alabama, has about 60% of the value that Connor Vanover does. But you would look at their actual statistical output and you would say, Grant Nelson wins in points. He wins in rebounds. The assist totals are pretty equal. Why is this guy so much better? But then you dig into the numbers and you see, Grant Nelson's needing vastly more usage. Grant Nelson's not a great three-point shooter. Grant Nelson's, assist to turnover rate and his efficiency with the ball is not very good. But then the big thing that probably separates them is Grant Nelson grades out really poorly on defense. Really, really poorly. But Grant Nelson is not playing, in deep drop coverage, holding the back line. Grant Nelson will get out and guard in space. Grant Nelson will do different things in switch. So Grant Nelson, based on his role, what he's doing, and also for the sheer fact that high usage offensive guys tend to rest on defense because they are having to exert so much effort on the other end of the floor. How is BPR accounting for all that? Only Evan knows. He's the one with the sauce there. But I think those are important considerations to keep in mind, and something that I always come back to, and it's why when I look at portal guys, I weight different stuff. So I put Torvik in, and I'll put BPR in. I'll use pivot analysis, which looks at on-off impact. Like when a guy is on the floor, what's the team's net rating? When he goes off, what happens? And if you put all that together, Connor still grades out really well. But Grant Nelson still grades out ahead of him. So when you really look at the impact metrics at the team level, Grant Nelson jumps ahead of him. And so I think that that's always something you've got to keep in mind. And it's really going to be interesting to see how BPR changes or what, Evan does when he gets under the hood and really fiddles with the algorithm. But I think it, I use it because I want to have, I like you, I like the attempt. I like that we're trying to basically do a WAR kind of number, like above replacement level. A 0 in BPR is not bad. That's average. And every number above that is better. Every number below it is. So it's an interesting attempt, but we got to just see what it does.
Well, and I also think, in complete fairness to Evan, I feel like as he gets more data on this, it's going to get better. It's going to get more accurate. Because he's also going to be able to sort of grade how players move up and down within leagues and how that impacts, and then essentially like looking at what sort of role a guy is going to have as he goes from one program to another. And I think like all these things are eventually going to be more quantifiable as we get more information on it. It's just, he's made a really, really bold attempt, and I think overall it's really very good.
Yeah.
It's but it's not like
it's not gospel. It's not
right.
Gospel.
It's not to the point where like people are going to use it the same way that they use KenPom.
Right. But I think that gets into the Connor Vanover situation there because it depends on where you want to go to evaluate what Connor is. Mm-hmm. If you just use BPR in a vacuum, would think, oh man, Mizzou killed it. But then you would go look at the, kind of what I always do is I always go back and isolate how guys played against KenPom top 100 teams, particularly transfers, because 80% of the teams Missouri plays are top 100 teams. And, once you really account for, how Connor's played in about 60 or so of those games, he grades out like a role player. Offensive, defensive efficiencies are about what the D1 median are. Net rating is +6. That's not bad, but it's median. Did it in about 16 minutes per game, 6.6 boards. When you really look at him against teams that Missouri is going to see every night and you grade it out, and even if you account for the on-off impact rating, it's close to median. So I think that's something to consider here is as he jumps, back from the number 24 league to one that's usually now in the top 4 or 5, we should probably, expect minutes to dip, and we should probably expect touches to dip, and that's going to cause scoring to go down. The hope here is that Connor's going to be more efficient with the touches. I think that's the thing that people should hope for here is, is he going to be able to maintain, and max out, the kind of spot-up shots he got and the rim attempts he was getting at Oral Roberts? And is he going to be able to hold the line defensively? That, to me, is where it's going to come down to here. Ultimately, it's a reserve guy, and can he, maintain sort of the efficiency that he played with at Oral Roberts? If you can do that, then you've got a really, really nice asset, that's on the roster at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think overall, you and I both like to pick up, at least at this point of the spring, knowing where, the other, what has happened with the other options, like what was left. I think we knew, the staff knew, everybody else who's paying attention knew there needed to be some kind of addition of size to the roster. And I think overall, this is best case scenario. Clearly was getting Caden Shedrick. But as far as like what the other options were, like I prefer Vanover to Jimmy Bell. So I think Dennis Gates missed on his top target, and they almost ended up with a guy who really didn't seem like he fit for what they were wanting to do, and he ends up with a guy who kind of does. And I think when we're what we're expecting for Connor is probably, I mean, I would be surprised if he averages more than 20 minutes a game. I think he's probably going to be in that 14 to 16 range. And I think that you have real value for a guy who can do the things that Connor can do and play in that role, and you can still play the style of basketball that you want to play.
Yeah. The other thing I think we have to factor in here is Arkansas fans aren't wrong. And, people who follow Arkansas aren't wrong when they say Connor struggled at times down there. He did. Absolutely. There were a couple of good games, but by and large, long stretches where, the fit was questionable. I think two things can be true. One, the play wasn't where you maybe would want to see it at the SEC level. But two, was the system fit there? We've talked about that before. When Connor first committed there, Muss said all the right things about, we like the fact that he can play in space. We like that he's a connector. We like that he can step out. By the time you get midway through his first year where he's actually playing in Fayetteville, Muss is very clearly saying, we need him to get down on the block and do things for us down there. We need him to finish plays down there. We need him to be that guy. So if the scheme fit wasn't there, offensively for him, he's not going to be a guy that's going to bang around the post. And if you really, really crave a big who's going to get out and be able to play ice coverage or down ball screens, that's not Connor. So Muss went and played guys that could do that. That's not to say that Connor is a bad player. It's that he couldn't do the things that Muss wanted to do. Mm-hmm. Same thing comes in here as we said before, what's he going to be asked to do defensively, and how's that going to be accounted for in the system? We don't know. We've got to see it. But I think two things can be true. I think he can be a good fit for what Dennis wants to do, and he struggled at Arkansas, and there are valid reasons for that. But again, it always sort of comes back to scheme fit, role, expectations by all parties there. If everyone's on the same page here, I think he can be a useful asset for this team. But it's got to be, accounted for, and everyone's got to sort of sync up for that. If it's not, then I think you could see this thing be a little bit rickety. But it's June. They've just been working out for a week. They're going to sort this all out before they get to install. So let's not damn it or, praise it before we even get out of the out of the voluntary workout periods.
Next on the timeline is Kaleb Brown, younger brother to Kobe. He entered the portal about a month ago, and I think we all kind of thought that was it for Caleb's time at Missouri. Signs at that point were that Missouri was very happy to bring him back if they were teaming him up with his brother. I think that was always sort of the assumption, was that, hey, like, we'll keep you around like as long as Kobe's around. But if Kobe's not around, then we may need that spot for somebody else. Because after 2 years, Kaleb has not really made an impact on the roster. We saw him get some extended minutes under Conzo Martin. He didn't look ready on an already bad team. And he had some a couple spots this past year where he was kind of thrown in, and he's I don't think he's like he's a bad player, but he's not necessarily, he just doesn't really give you much. He doesn't shoot the ball very well. He does pass the ball well.
The turnovers are high.
Yeah, he does anticipate the ball pretty well, and he has nabbed a few steals. But is this a guy who you see impacting your lineup? I mean, if you did, then you probably aren't bringing in John Tanji, Tamar Bates, Caleb Grill, trying to sign, Caleb Love, Matthew Cleveland, all guys who are going to play a lot in the backcourt. Along with already having, Sean East and Nick Honor, and
bringing
Robinson coming in. Yeah. So it's just that, like, the backcourt is crowded. If Caleb wanted to grow to be 6'11", hey, that'd be great. Like, he's got enough skill that he'd be a really good post player. But I do think that his value to this particular team, and you can agree or disagree with me if you want, is going to be as a guy who you know what you're going to get from him. He's a really good kid, just like Kobe and Caleb both come from a great family. Everybody raves about how they interact with the community and their teammates, all that kind of stuff. So you get somebody who understands the team, the locker room, the community, and can help with that and the rest of the roster. As far as on the court impact, I don't really see a lot.
Yeah, I always try and hesitate here because I think these are people, and I fall into the trap sometimes of evaluating them as pieces and not necessarily as people. But I think it's that time of year where you really have to evaluate what you're going to get out of every spot. Kobe, we saw him grow and develop, but Kobe was playing 30, 40 minutes as a freshman, was clearly, a 6th or 7th guy in a rotation, took a step forward as a junior. Caleb's not in that situation. Caleb, got a late audition under Conzo when the season was pretty much forgone at that point. He got not a lot, but he got extended looks during the early part of the schedule last year with different looks. And it wasn't like they were putting him out there with, mop up time lineups. He was getting run time with real rotation pieces. And, I rewatched the film, I cut the film, you know me, I'm always going to try and see a developmental pathway for someone. But the numbers in the film just weren't supporting that case. And so the question then became, okay, maybe he's not a fit for this level. Does he have to go find that opportunity? And I thought that's what he was doing, was saying, okay, my brother's moving on. There's not a clear role for me here. I've probably been recruited over by 3 or 4 guys. I'm going to go find minutes. Now, if you went into the portal and you genuinely looked for opportunities and you came out of that saying, I still want to be at Missouri, I still feel comfortable here, and the staff in exit meetings has made it pretty clear to you what life is going to look like here, and you embrace that, and you want to come back, then I'm fine with that, because everyone's transparent about what their motives are, what their anticipations are. The expectations have been laid down. So if Caleb's going to come back and be, a good culture guy, I think that has value. I really think it does. As you've got newcomers coming in, trying to build some chemistry and cohesion, or maybe a little bit of continuity is missing. Having a guy who knows the institution, knows the program, knows everything else is really, really important. So if Caleb can contribute to that, then I'm fine with this. And I think it's a healthy move and it can work out well for everybody. And if he can find a path to, being a 9th or 10th guy on, the roster, all the better for him. But we'll see how that's going to go, because there's a lot of bodies in the backcourt right now that are going to, want to put in tickets and slips for minutes.
Just looking at the roster, I just
Good
brought
God.
it up. If you include all the guys that are preferred walk-ons, already on campus and working out, that includes Jackson Francois and J.B. Brown and Danny Stevens. Somebody else in that list is not on an athletic scholarship. Who it is, I don't pretend to know.
But Bor Majak is still around. There he is. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, and I've got him on the list here too. So, Mabor Majak. Yeah. So Missouri is at 18 guys on the roster, and 5 of those guys, are not on scholarship. So the others, like we don't really know. It is a long list. But if you're going up and down the list, so, we're expecting Noah Carter to kind of step up and have a larger role. You expect Caleb Grill to play a big role. Sean East and Nick Honor were basically splitting minutes at the point guard. Probably expect that to happen. They did share the court together some, but most of the time they were, splitting those minutes. Tonji, I just think he's going to play a lot. Vanover, Tamar Bates is going to play a lot. Kurt Lewis is a guy who we don't even talk about. Just like he's almost forgotten at this point. And he's another like solid kind of role guy who could play some spot minutes. We're hoping that Aiden Shaw takes a jump, and then you have the freshman. So I just like, if you're looking at that from, from a standpoint of is Kaleb Brown going to break into that rotation? I would say it's probably not very likely. You good with that? Yeah. One thing that does clear it up though is Isiaih Mosley not being around opens up a lot of minutes at the combo guard spot, because
a lot of theoretical minutes, as people are keen to remind me. A lot of theoretical minutes.
Yeah, so he is not on the roster, and I'm gonna drop this out of the display now. So we're at a point now where 18 guys in the roster. Mosley is not one of them. Him not coming back means that there are a lot of that sort of like spot. He was really kind of like the 2 guard.
Yeah.
And a guy who could handle the ball. A guy who could score efficiently, and he did. And Missouri is going to be up against it as far as finding scoring next year. I think going into the spring, they had a decent, we'll say, hope that they would be able to bring both Mosley and Kobe Brown back, and now both are gone. So there is no real like standout alpha on the players or on the roster, and a guy who can consume a lot of possessions. One thing, like I know that there are some people who think, oh well, maybe Tamar Bates can kind of step into that sort of role, but Tamar really, even when he was a prospect, was not like a ball dominant.
Yeah.
Pitch him the ball and let him go make a play kind of score.
No.
When he transferred to IMG, he was very much off the ball. How that trickles down and impacts the rest of the roster, I mean, basically, Missouri's and Dennis Gates is a good offensive coach. So we can trust in Dennis Gates to figure that out. But they're going to have to find ways to score,
Yeah.
and
This
without having that closer.
Yeah, this is how I would frame it. I love John Tonji. We love John Tonji. We think he's a really good pickup. Last year was John Tonji's first year, as a starter, like a legit starter at Colorado State after 3 years. But when Colorado State needed a bucket, who they threw the ball to? Isaiah Stevens. Isaiah Stevens was the guy that they said, clear out, let this guy go to work. Before that, over the previous couple of years, David Roddy was on that list. Maybe John Tonji is that guy. Maybe the opportunities just weren't there. But we've got 4 years showing us that, the offense was not, relying on him to be that sort of creative driver or that late clock option for them. We talk about Kaleb Grill. Kaleb Grill is a great shooter, can be a great floor spacer, tough off-ball defender, has a lot of tenacity. Iowa State wasn't drawing up action late clock for Kaleb Grill, but he was spacing off the ball and shooting a lot. You talk about Tamar Bates. When Tamar first got to IU, there was a lot of chatter before his freshman year, like maybe he can become a 3-level guy. Maybe he can become this, all-out scorer for us. But like I said, for those who watched him and really scouted him for a couple of years, we bought him more as a 3-and-D type guy who would eventually develop playing off the kick. I don't think any of us necessarily thought 3-level scorer for him. We thought, this guy can become a really, really tough on-ball defender who's going to make shots for you. But even in Indiana, when Indiana needed a bucket, it was, Xavier Johnson, it was Jalen Hood-Shavino, it was Trace Jackson. Those are the guys who were getting the touches to go make plays. Connor Vanover played with Max freaking Asmus at Oral Roberts.
Yeah.
When Oral Roberts needed a bucket, who was going to get it? Max Asmus, or even like Isaiah Briscoe, or the Kansas transfer whose name I'm botching. But 2 on-ball guards were going to get it. The 4 newcomers, none of these guys were relied upon to be on-ball creators who you could make as a focal point of your offense. I will get some people would say, well, what does it matter? Mosley didn't even play last year. Mosley wasn't available. Maybe it was going to be. Isiaih Mosley had 3 years of being a top scouting reports. Every place he went, everybody knew who the ball was going to. Isiaih Mosley was one of the best P&R scorers in the country, one of the best isolation scorers in the country, one of the best pull-up shooters in the country. Even if he's not playing a lot last year, we still had 3 years, 100 games plus of evidence, even against really good KenPom teams, that Isiaih Mosley was a guy you could put in a high ball screen and he can go get you a bucket. Or you could put him in a split or a spread ball screen, he can go create for somebody else. That is foreclosed now. That is not an option. You're not worrying about, is he available? He's not available. And there's not a guy on this roster that I think right now possesses that kind of skill set. Again, it's June. Maybe a guy emerges. I wrote that today. There's always time. They can figure out how this offense is going to work. But right now, Missouri doesn't have a guy that it can say, we're going to just run action and let you go do what you do and go get us a bucket. Dennis Gates will tell you the first 10 seconds is to attack. The last 10 is for your playmaker. That's who you give the ball to. Last year it was Kobe. It could have been Zay this year. If you're really candid and you really look at this roster, do they have that right now? And that's not a slight to other guys. That's just looking at the totality of their careers. They just don't have the same body of work that Isiaih Mosley would have had in that regard. That's what they're missing right now.
Yeah. A lot of really good players.
Love the depth, love the mixing and matching. Love the diversity here.
Yes. they're gonna have to go about it with a lot of their depth. I mean, I do think this is a roster where, Gates is going to be playing, 10, possibly even 11 guys a night. And if he's doing that, then it could be one of these things with, all right, maybe you ride a little bit of a hot hand, but I mean, the one thing when you kind of talk about like, all right, like you can throw the ball to Kobe Brown, and you can put him in a position where he can kind of go make a play for him that was kind of like at the elbow. Um, with Zay, was a guy who could get the ball in the wing, could get the ball out front, and get a ball screen and look to kind of go make a play. But I mean, if you're just looking at the guards, like everybody, like you were kind of pointing out, like um, Bates is a guy who I think is good if he's able to kind of catch and rip, but not really a guy who you want squaring up a defender. And I think like that's the thing that Kobe had. That's the thing that Mosley had. That's the thing that the guys in this roster don't really have right now. They've got several guys who I think can catch and rip.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's and this is the thing too. Like there are, we talk a lot about teams at the top of the conference here. Alabama could hit you with their depth, but you know what they did when they needed a bucket? Brandon Miller. You could talk about Tennessee, being kind of a collective enterprise, but you know what they would do? High ball screen for Zakai Ziegler and let that guy go to work. Arkansas, even without Nick Smith available, it was, let's just go see what Ricky Council can do for us. Let's get Anthony Black in a side ball screen, see if he can break down a dribbler and get a dump off. Do you have a guy who can win one-on-one right now? That's what it is. Like, top teams in this league have depth. They've got talent up and down the roster, but they also have one guy where you can come down and say, screw it, just chuck the ball to that guy and let him go. Missouri doesn't have that. And that's not to say that that's going to doom this roster or it's going to doom this team. But, it is nice to have that. Kobe played within the collective structure, but he was still an alpha when he needed to be.
Yeah, it's a safety blanket.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think like Missouri is going to find a way to score points because I think at this point we know Dennis Gates is going to run the kind of offense that is going to generate points. But having that safety blanket is something that a lot of coaches like having. Because sometimes your offensive actions don't generate the shot that you want.
It got them a win over Utah State. That's what got them there. They stopped running offense. They ran horn sets, ran 4 or 5 ball screens for Kobe and just said, hey, you, take us to the second round. That's what it was. They ran horn sets, which had been around since the 1990s. It wasn't like innovative stuff. It was our dude is better than your dude from the elbow.
Yeah.
And that's why Missouri won its first NCAA tournament game in a decade. It wasn't this, kumbaya collaborative approach. It was, screw it, Kobe, just go get it done for us. And that's fine. Like, I can appreciate Dennis's offense and his, kind of egalitarian spirit there, but sometimes you just need a dude to go make a play. Do they have that right now? We'll see.
Yeah.
Again, June, things can change, but we'll see. They're also trying to recruit 2 dudes like that out of the portal. So, if you're pursuing that,
missed on both. So you're referring to Caleb Love and referring to Matthew Cleveland. So do you think that the Missouri roster is complete at this point?
Yeah, I would say it is. I mean, they have one, I'm going to call it NIL spot left, but functionally you can roll out an 8 or 9 man rotation right now. You're probably 2 to 3 deep at every spot. Would you like to have an alpha in that 15th slot? Yeah, but there's nobody on the market right now. The portal is, shuttered. All the guy, once we get to this week, I think when Arthur Kaluma went off the board, that pretty much shut down the wing market. So they're also in the second week of voluntary workouts right now. So you bring someone in this late, I don't know if it's going to be an impact piece. So I would think that they're pretty much done and just going to focus getting through the summer. I just don't. It's a supply issue, and also at some point your roster is your roster, and you got to go roll with what you got. And this is not a bad roster. I think, if I had to I'm doing the SEC exit survey right now. This is not like a roster that I would say is like going to be that I would have really fighting to get out of the bottom 4. It's one that I think is going to be between like 5th and 10th. It's going to be squarely in the middle of the league right now. If I had to guess, it's going to come down to, like we always say, what happens in 2 or 3 close games that change the outcome. We saw that with the roster last year. 3 or 4 close wins, and that's the difference between double bye and sitting in the 8-9 game. So I don't think this is a team that's doomed. I don't think this is something where people should be, as panicked as they were after Zoe's, retrofitting a couple of years ago. It's just understanding that not having a guy like Mosley and not having a guy like Brown is kind of one of those separator things between being, maybe a team that's in the mix for a double bye versus really having to fight and scrap and claw in the middle of the SEC table. But not worth panicking over, but important to factor it in as we move into the preseason and through the summer.
Yeah. And at this point, Dennis Gates has sort of shown that at the very least they're going to be competitive. And I think having a little bit more depth on the roster should hopefully kind of help them kind of round out the edges a little bit.
Yep.
But yeah, so I think we both sort of feel the roster is done. The summer, though, is not over yet. We are just at the beginning of, this summer of watching the 2024 recruits, seeing who maybe some of the priorities for 2025 may emerge. It's hard to imagine. But yeah, so many of their top post targets have come off the board. And quickly, there are still some guys that are a little bit lower rated that they have offers out to and have been connected with. So there's that. The bowl announcement is something that I think we were surprised to happen all this fast.
Yeah.
But it never really felt like Missouri
pushed all the chips in.
Yeah, they never really felt like they were fully committed to bowl the way that I think maybe a lot of people had assumed they might be, considering the proximity, of him kind of being a St. Louis kid. And for those that don't know, I mean, he's an immigrant from South Sudan and was living with Marcus Wilson. Wilson is a former assistant coach at SLU. And last season was working in Evansville, which is his alma mater. He's a Hall of Fame level basketball player at Evansville. And by all accounts, a really terrific guy. And so he's sort of, played the role of his mentor and helping, Bull, get to St. Louis. He attended CBC, moved on to Sunrise Christian, and now he's going to take his talents to Gainesville. It leaves Missouri in a little bit of a spot because, even though I think it's fair to say that we know Dennis Gates wants a level of skill with every position on the floor. However, you also need to fill spots, and there's no denying the length, the athleticism, the fluidity that Bull brings at 7'3", and I feel like that's something that you can find useful, even if the offensive skill isn't quite where you want it.
Yeah, this was sort of a not weird, but Missouri had really honed in on, I think, 4 bigs this class. They hosted 4 bigs, but John Bull was the first one they had on campus, last September. They brought in James Brown a couple of weeks later, a big out of Chicago. Peyton Marshall, an Atlanta native and 4-star prospect, came in October. But Jaron Stevenson has always been, I think, kind of the one that, if you were to like put together a composite of the big that this staff wants, it's Jaron Stevenson. Stevenson was offered last June. Mizzou was supposed to get him on campus, I think, for the Alabama game, but he backed out of that in late January. Got on campus in March, and Missouri was in the mix of 4 or 5 programs that you usually heard around him, but usually it was UNC, Georgetown, Missouri, like UVA moved in for a little bit there. Bama sort of swapped in spots there, but it's been 4 to 5 programs. But Stevenson is a guy who grew up 15 minutes from the UNC campus. He's been there since freshman.
His mother is an alumni.
His mother is an alum who played on NCAA tournament teams at UNC. So it was always sort of like, if you were going to dig him out, I would argue that's probably the biggest recruiting win. Like MPJ would obviously be there, but if you considered circumstances, like of where a kid was, to pull a kid basically out of Chapel Hill, where his mom's an alum, would have been just an epic recruiting upset. Right. He got him on campus. They took their shot, but coming out of that visit with Stevenson, you didn't hear like a lot of real like, oh man, Missouri's deep in the cut now. They are right there. They're right there. Once we got to grassroots season, it was, look at UVA making a push. He's going to Alabama for a visit. It just became like one of those deals where you prioritized him, you got him on campus, and then, it became more of an Alabama and UNC race because both of those were going to be open to reclassifying. Meanwhile,
right. That's
meanwhile, in the back, there's John Bull.
Right.
And it always felt like, Bull always spoke highly of Dennis Gates. There was a respect there for the staff. But it's easy to see, where the staff's preferences were, because Jaron Stevenson is more of a stretch playmaking 5. A lot of skill on offense, can play out in space. He can legitimately catch, rip, and go. He can push off the miss. Really fits a lot of what the staff wants to do offensively. John Bull's development has been flipped. He is, learned how to defend first, finish at the rim, and now is when his offensive development's going to begin. Now this is when I think you're going to start seeing, at Sunrise and with Mocan and going into his freshman year of college, that's when they're going to start trying to put the offensive pieces together. And so realistically, if you were looking for an impact guy early, it was Stevenson. But if you were willing to do what Florida's going to be willing to do, which is invest some patience in Bull and really, buy into his development there, then I think you could put a plan together for him and demonstrate that, then you were going to win this recruitment. And I think it's worth wondering if Missouri prioritized Stevenson, its preference for offensive skill didn't quite lead to maybe the fullest plan for Bull. Florida moves in. Like, Florida only moved in this spring and just closed it down really, really quickly. So I think that those are things to consider in the back here is, preferences for bigs, the way Missouri sort of pursued its board was, Jaron Stevenson and John Bull were both available all winter, and they really made a push after Jaron Stevenson. Florida came in, John Bull's available. Yeah.
Yeah, and with Stevenson, there's like the talk of whether or not he's going to reclassify. It looks like Alabama's going to get Grant Nelson, who, that may impact Stevenson's, I guess, possible landing in Alabama. But, it does seem to be Alabama and North Carolina, and everybody else is in a distant trailing position.
Yeah.
So what does that necessarily mean for the rest of the board? I mean, we've talked a lot about, Dallas Thomas and Honor Boateng. We've talked about Marcus Allen. Guys that are at the top of the board. but also guys that aren't necessarily
Bigs.
like bigs. And the staff needs bigs. I do think that if the progression of Butler and Pierce and those guys are able to step in as sophomores and play larger roles, then you have something. But like also you shouldn't be expecting Jordan Butler to be playing 35 minutes a night as a sophomore. You need something else in there with him. You need, and one of the reasons that I sort of like Bull is, those two guys are very sort of different.
They're complementary pieces.
Yeah, like Butler is, and you can play those guys with each other. But Butler is a little bit more of what Missouri is looking for. He's a little bit more of the skilled guy. He can shoot the ball. He can stretch the floor. He can, he's going to be able to do some pick and pop and stuff like that. And so I just feel like if you have a guy who's 7'3" and can move, and really the way that he plays, you can see him defending farther away from the rim and actually holding his own. It seems to me like the right kind of fit if you can get him on campus and develop the skill. But not Missouri's problem anymore. And then I also think like you can't necessarily ignore the fact that it's been rumored that wherever Marcus Wilson was headed, that John Bull was going to follow. We'll see. Wilson did leave Evansville.
I expect movement sometime in the next 2 weeks on that front. Like clarity on what's going to happen with Wilson in the next 2 weeks.
If he ends up in Gainesville, then I think it's pretty clear that like they were willing to kind of take him on in any kind of role, whatever that role may be.
And clear, Marcus is qualified for that. Marcus is qualified,
right? Yeah, I don't.
I just want to say, I know you're not saying that. I just want to get that out there.
Yeah, we did joke a little bit. This isn't like hiring Michael Porter Jr.'s dad. And no disrespect to Michael Porter Sr. Michael Porter Sr. did not have experience coaching college basketball, and he was hired on at Washington. He was really good friends with Lorenzo Romar, and he was hired on as an assistant at Washington. Missouri then turned around and hired him, and it was because of his son. There's a
Marcus had a track record well before this. Yeah.
Yeah. Like he was already a great basketball player. He's been involved in the game of basketball for years. He's done things at all different levels. I don't think he's ever had a high major assistant job, but he was at SLU for a while, and he was like one of the top assistants at Evansville last year. So like he knows the job, and we also don't even know like what sort of position if he ends up at Florida. I would just expect at the very least for him to have some kind of job that's closer to Gainesville, because I think that relationship for him and for John is important.
And to be clear, Marcus adopted John. Like, that took him 3 attempts to get him over here. He's adopted him. Like, he lives with their family. He's with their family. He's part of their family, and it's that relationship's going to outlast his basketball career too. So I think that's, something that's to be factored in here, was that John was in basically Wichita, Kansas last year. Marcus's family's in St. Louis, and then Marcus was in Evansville. So if you can get everybody back together, I think that's going to be, a consideration if he winds up in Gainesville. And the other side of the fence here is, if that's something that you have to consider, it in the defense of, Dennis Gates, that's something you have to consider is, if we want to have Marcus in this role, is that a move we would want to make as a program? I think it's different if you feel like this is just a recruitment that's normal there. But if that's a factor that's in there, is, the ability to have everyone together, I think that, but it means taking someone on your staff. That's a certain angle that I think, has to, in a variable that's different than a lot of other recruitments. So I will say that, in defense of Gates' staff, if they had to weigh that into it too, that's a factor. So we'll see, where Marcus ultimately ends up, but I don't think you can discount that either. As for the rest of the board, James Brown came off in early January. He committed North Carolina. Has slipped about 40 spots in the composite rating. Peyton Marshall committed to Auburn, but is decommitted. There was some scuttle after he decommitted that, maybe that might open up kind of a mad dash for him. And Alan Flanagan, who recruited him to Auburn, is at Ole Miss now, and he took a visit to Ole Miss the first weekend of June, and there are already some crystal ball predictions coming in that he's going to wind up in Oxford. So that looks like an Auburn-Ole Miss battle. Bull is off the board to Florida now. Stevenson is an Alabama-UNC battle. So all four guys that you hosted last fall, none appear that they will make it here. And there's a world where if Stevenson does commit to Alabama, 3 of them are in the SEC and not at your campus, which is, that'll drive a man to drink if that happened. But like I said, there are 2 bigs that are on the board. Honestly, I have not watched enough of Common Mocker or Cholmerjot to sort of comment on them. I just know that they have offers. They were offered this spring, or Chol was offered this spring, and Common was offered in the winter. But those are 2 bigs that are on the board. Otherwise, the names to watch, probably Marcus Allen, probably Dallas Thomas, and Honor Boateng. Those are probably the 3 I would focus on right now as the guys. We love T.O. Barrett. We think he's been a fast riser up boards, but T.O. took a visit to Tulsa last weekend. We'll see we'll see if T.O. is a guy that they like at the combo guard spot. Quinn Pang visited with Nas Cunningham last fall. I haven't picked up, that's really a factor at the hybrid spot. I think that they would prefer Dallas Thomas or Jordan McCollum at the 4, at that stretch 4 spot. Travis Perry took an unofficial visit to Missouri, but you don't really see Missouri deeply mentioned there. For him, he's a combo guard out of Lyon County, Kentucky. TJ Williams, a point guard out of Wichita and at Wichita Heights. Took an unofficial visit in February. But again, a guy just on the outside of the composite top 150. But again, as we get ready to move this month, what is Marcus Allen doing? What is Dallas Thomas doing? What is Honor Boateng doing? Those are the 3 that I would circle for folks to watch as we enter the closing stretch of the cycle.
It could still be a really good recruiting class. It just won't have a featured, highly rated big man.
No, it will not. It will not.
But yeah, I mean, you can do a lot worse than any of the 3. The guys that we're sort of watching closely and what they do. You and I both love Boateng. I've really kind of come around on Slim Thomas. I think we talked about him a little bit in the last pod. He's become like one of my favorite guys. I just think he's kind of fits that Trent Pierce mold. Who I think anybody that listened to us last year around this time knows how excited I was for Trent Pierce, and still am, Matt. I still am excited about Trent Pierce and his future. Hopefully, all of the future at Missouri. Well, that's all I've got. We are hitting mid-June. We're recording this June 12th. It is that time where things are moving a little bit slower. Hopefully, it didn't really happen the last week that we were off, but that's sort of true for most of the time. Anything else that you want to say before we get out of here?
No, just that it's volunteer workout season. We're going to see fun videos of drills and that type of stuff. I hope Dennis, again, shares some video of the type of drill and skill work they're doing. It's always just great to see what the staff is doing, at least in terms of the skill side there. Always enlightening. So hopefully that content continues to roll out. Only personal plug is next week I'll have the SEC exit survey done. That is a labor of love for us both, tracking you track pretty much the guys who leave rosters. I track the transfers. We put them all together. We figure out what returning production every team will have. And then we write about 300 words on each of the reset rosters. And that is a behemoth piece, but it's really, really good, I think, for us to see and for readers to see just sort of what the lay of the land is. And it's a nice tee up for what you do in the fall with season previews, but a lot of movement. It's easy for us to get fixated on what Missouri has done alone. The exit survey really is sort of a nice comprehensive look at what every SEC program has done in the spring. And hopefully it gives you some reference as you move through the summer and you begin to see preseason top 25s or you begin to see mags come out. You can come back and go, okay, yeah, this is what the roster movement looked like. So that will be coming next week.
Well, so thank you everyone for tuning in to this last episode of Dive Cuts and Rock M Radio. We are a proud partner of the Fans First Sports Network. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to see more, just like it being directly into your personal device, you can just click on the subscribe button below. You can also find this podcast through the Apple Podcasts app for iPhone, the Google Podcasts app for Android, or whatever app you listen to your favorite podcast. You can find us, Rock M Radio, on Spotify as well, if you're a Spotify subscriber and listen to your pods there. And consequently, if you like other sports, Fans First Sports Network does have a whole network of the other sports podcasts, and those guys are doing great work. If you're into baseball, football, soccer, hockey, NBA, it's all available, Matt. It's all available on Fans First Sports Network. So you can follow him at Matt J. Harris 85 on Twitter. You can follow me at Sam T. Snelling. And we'll be back probably in a couple weeks. And we'll talk more Mizzou basketball, more dive cuts. Until then, thank you for tuning in.